Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
Hello and welcome to the ISO Show. Well, today I'm delighted to be joined by Andrew Geens, who's the Head of Certification at SIBSI. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, Mel.
Well, thanks very much for joining us today. The theme of the podcast today is on what SIBSI does, because there's a wealth of information on the SIBSI website that can help lots of different sorts of businesses. So we'll delve into that. And also on the topic of energy management, we'll delve into ESOS as well. But before we go any further, could you give us a bit of background, please, Andrew, and how you started in the profession?
Yes, I can do that. Thanks, Mel. Well, I went into engineering straight from school, doing a Merchant Navy Training Board engineering apprenticeship. I worked for the BP shipping company, around oil tankers, logically enough. So there was an energy connection right from the start. I didn't stay in that too long. It gave me a very good engineering grounding, but I moved into the health service as a healthcare engineer, looking after and upgrading and installing engineering systems in hospital buildings. From that, I went into higher education. None of these steps seemed particularly logical, but they all seemed good at the time. I worked at the University of Glamorgan in South Wales for getting on for 20 years. While I was there, I completed a PhD in low energy ventilation systems. And then I got very involved in the development of the energy performance of buildings regulations and how they're implemented in the UK, working with energy assessor qualification development and that sort of thing. So when 8 years ago, SIBSI were looking for someone to run their certification business for energy assessors, I found that quite an interesting prospect and took that job, which got me where I am today. I did join SIBSI as a member quite a long time ago, 1984. I'm now a fellow of SIBSI and quite unusual in that not many SIBSI members work for SIBSI.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Before we delve into finding out a bit more about SIBSI, would you mind sharing something about you that not many other people know?
Yes, probably not many people know that I'm the bass player in an Iraqi band based in London.
Interesting. How did that come about? How did you get involved with that?
Well, my midlife crisis involved learning how to play the bass. I worked at the university at the time, and one of my colleagues there was an accomplished guitarist, and he gave me quite a bit of coaching. We both ended up working in London a few years later, and he was putting a band together to do some fundraising for charities in Iraq and Syria, the objective of getting children off the streets and into education. And he asked me if I'd like to be the bass player in his band.
Oh,
so I've been doing that the last couple of years.
Yeah, just, being able to, play the music and be in a band as a hobby, but being able to do some good as well. That sounds brilliant.
Yes, it's been a bit of a challenge playing Iraqi music because until that invitation came along, I'd never really heard any before.
I don't think I have either. So when we go off air, I wouldn't mind if you could send me a link to that. I'm intrigued now. Right, that's fascinating. So I think moving on to SIBSI then. So SIBSI, sorry, I bet I clarified that. That's the Chartered Institution of Building Services Engineers. Could you just provide a bit of background as to what the organisation does then, please, at the Institute?
Yes, I could do that. That's sort of, as the name suggests, it's a professional engineering institution that represents the interests of the building services engineering community and sort of furthers their work for the good of society at large. So for people who don't know, building services engineering, quite diverse. It's sort of anything in a building that uses energy, basically. All the engineering systems from basic sanitary provision, hot and cold water and drainage, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, transport, as in lifts and escalators, lighting, and so on. So quite a variety of skills involved there. And colloquially, building services engineers are often referred to in the industry as M&E, mechanical and electrical. All of those things sort of break down into one or the other. And a lot of people come into the sector from other areas of engineering, as I did. Often they're trained as mechanical engineers or electrical engineers and then focus later on in their careers on the engineering services in buildings. So CIBSE publish a lot of guidance on how to design and operate these systems.
Okay, yeah, because obviously they're all critical to managing buildings, aren't they? So could you give an example of one of those guides then, please, Andrew?
Yes, well, specific to our area of activity, there are energy performance of buildings regulations that require air conditioning systems to be inspected once every 5 years. They acknowledge they're quite a high proportion of the energy use in buildings, the air conditioning systems. So to make sure they're being used properly and efficiently, they're inspected once every 5 years. The procedure methodology for carrying out these inspections is based on CIBSE publication. There's a technical memorandum series, so they're all prefixed TM, technical memorandum. So TM44 is air conditioning inspections. So these publications are all put together by panels of experts that are convened and managed by CIBSE to produce the publications. And often they're taken up by industry. A lot of the publications are referred to as second-tier documents in building regulations, or in the case of TM44, in the energy performance of buildings regulations.
And how would somebody begin the journey in terms of CIBSE membership and awareness? Is that normally at student level at university?
It is, though, as I said, it's often from other areas of engineering. There are building services engineering degrees. We did run one at the University of Glamorgan. That was part of my role there, running the building services engineering degree. So this sort of leads people through to membership of CIBSE and careers in the industry. But quite often people convert later on in their careers. And there are mature sort of candidate routes as well, people who've learnt whilst working.
Okay. And what are some of the benefits of being a member? Do you have networking events and, obviously apart from publications and that sort of thing?
Yes, publications. There's a monthly journal which covers legislation updates, topical items in terms of new technology, case studies. But they also have a regional network where events are organised regionally around the country and around the world as well. They have regions in Ireland, Hong Kong.
Yeah, I was having a look on your website and
Australia, New Zealand.
It looks like it. I don't know why, but I assumed that it was a British-based institution. But you've actually got members across 98 countries, according to the website, with over 20,000 members. So it's quite substantial, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Probably a quarter of the membership is based outside the UK, a rough estimate.
Okay, great. So one of the topics of conversation that is going to be at the top of many businesses' agendas is ESOS at the moment. Obviously, we had the first round 4 years ago when we had the requirement for many organisations to submit energy reports to the Environment Agency. Could you give us a bit of background as to what's happening this time around, please, with ESOS and in terms of, what organisations need to do, the deadline, and the potential penalty for not complying?
Yes, yeah. Perhaps I should just explain first that CIBSE certification is a business that runs independently of CIBSE, a parent company, if you like. A few years ago, CIBSE were aware that there was impending legislation that was going to require energy professionals with particular competencies to be on an approved register in order to engage with energy work that was driven by government legislation. So quite often CIBSE membership is a requirement of an employer, or if someone is employing a company to do some design work for them, they'll specify they want the design team to include a member of CIBSE. But for these requirements, a professional body membership wasn't what was going to be required. It was going to be very vocationally specific on the task in hand.
So these are for individuals then, individual registrations?
Yes, it's individual registrations, and though CIBSE took advice on this and decided they were going to operate registers under licence from the relevant government departments, and the advice they had was that they would best do this following the procedures in the international standard for certifying individual competence, which is ISO 17024, and to be compliant with that standard, they would need to operate these registers quite independently of CIBSE. So they were demonstrably not just a rubber stamping exercise for CIBSE members to access these particular areas of work.
Yeah.
So that's why we operate as a separate company. Yeah. So the registers include, I mentioned the air conditioning inspectors earlier, EPC assessors, energy performance certificates, display energy certificates. These are all under approval from MHCLG, who manage those regulations. And subsequently, we applied to run the ESOS register when those regulations came into force. And we are, in fact, operating the largest register in the country. I think the Energy Institute are probably the second largest behind us.
So that register, that's available on your website, isn't it? If somebody wants to search for an ESOS lead assessor or a low carbon energy assessor? Yes,
you'll find those assessors on our website, which is sibsicertification.co.uk. You can search by a postcode, but with the ESOS register, you can also search by specialism. All of the assessors on our register have identified 3 areas of specialism, whether it's a particular type of industry sector, particular manufacturing, or whether it's transport. I think we've got people who list airports as a specialism, shipping, other transport, different types of manufacturing. So, if you're in a particular sector and are looking for an assessor with competence in that area, you can search in that way. Probably about 30 people on the register who include 50,001 implementation in their specialism, because that's one of the routes to compliance. So
actually on your database for that, because obviously your background is in relation to ISO 50001, the energy management standard. And one of our consultants went on one of your courses and completed the low carbon energy assessor course. So she's classified as a low carbon consultant now as well. But that's useful, isn't it, for organisations that might not necessarily have somebody internally to do that they can then go and search and find that resource. Or indeed, if they then want to send one of their employees onto one of the courses, then they can do that so that they have the knowledge in-house as well.
Yes, that's right. We hope we've got a sort of one-stop shop offering with the sort of energy legislation environment. So as well as having the largest ESOS register, which means that people looking are more likely to find what they're looking for on our register, we've also got people on our registers that can help with the various routes to compliance. So some of our ESOS assessors are DEC assessors, which is one of the ways you can demonstrate compliance for ESOS. We have certified a few non-domestic Green Deal advisors. I don't think that's the very commonly used route, but it is something, again, that we can help facilitate. And we do have people who can help implementing 50,001. And actually, we were already UCAS accredited for 17024. So it was a fairly simple process for us to look at the certification of the 50,001 standard as well. So we are UCAS accredited to do that. So, across the whole ESOS spectrum, whatever a company's requirements are, from upskilling some of their own staff through training courses to delivering the ESOS reports through whichever route, we can help people. Okay, great.
So you mentioned about routes to compliance for ESOS. So obviously there are a number of different ways to get there. In your opinion, Andrew, what do you think is the most effective route to sound energy management compliance? So that's obviously meeting the ESOS requirements, but also, not just ticking the box, but having an ongoing program of energy management efficiency within an organisation. Just wanted to get your feedback on that.
Okay, well, we're involved with quite a few different government initiatives in the sort of energy performance area, and I should start by saying that we think that the ESOS regulations have been very effective in closing a gap. They're very effective in requiring the bigger companies who are significant energy users to take stock, to understand where they are with their energy use and what their energy saving opportunities are. And they were implemented in quite a rush initially, because the first reporting deadline was sort of within about 18 months of the legislation being introduced.
And it was all very new for a lot of organisations at the time. Do you plan to be prepared this time round?
Well, we'd like to think so, but anecdotally, I'm not actually getting a lot of evidence to support that. So, yes, the legislation is very good. It was needed, and it's been implemented pretty effectively. And importantly, it's been enforced very effectively. The Environment Agency, who were tasked with operating the registers and sort of enforcing the standards, have done a very good job of making sure companies did comply in 2015. which should have sort of sent the right message to companies about being ready next time. But I am hearing from assessors on the ground that whilst some of their clients have been very well organised and have been engaged through the 4-year cycle and reported very early, well ahead of the deadline, which is now just a few weeks away, they've also had people coming back at the very last minute, people who sort of popped up that had a report done 4 years ago and said, we haven't actually done any of the work you identified as opportunities. Can you do a report again? That's not very motivating for the assessor to think, so you want me to do another report that you'll ignore for another 4 years. So that sort of leads to sort of the limitations of ESOS reporting. It's very good. And I think the logic always was that once companies know how much they're spending on energy and have had a good report advising them on how to save energy going forward, it would be a no-brainer, to use a colloquialism, to act on the advice. But I think the reality is a bit different to that. So whilst it has encouraged some companies to put energy performance higher up their agenda, and it's come to the board's attention because that's the requirement of the regulations, and it has made changes in some organisations, I think simply the concept of it being a 4-year cycle has led to a lot of organisations being quite complacent. So I think the end game in meetings with the Environment Agency, I get the impression that it's their view as well, and the government department, BEIS, that companies are being encouraged to use 50,001 as the long-term solution.
Question about the most effective method in terms of routes to begins for ESOS.
Yeah. I got to your question eventually.
Things done by the deadline, by the 5th of December. But in terms of a long-term energy management strategy, you think that ISO 50001 is the more effective way forward?
Yes, I think using DEX is better than not doing anything, and it's certainly a quick way of, if you've got suitable, if enough of your energy use is in suitable buildings for doing that, then that will get you through a compliance requirement. But it's not really, if you don't do anything with it, I mean, if you continue using DEX annually to monitor your performance over time, that's good as well. But implementing an energy management system following the requirements of a standard that has been put together, it's the distilled expertise of an international committee of experts in this area, and as a good practice way of doing things. So, you don't even need to go to the trouble of getting a certification body to come and certify you're doing it correctly. If you're confident you're able to follow the standard yourself, you can get the benefits of using the standard simply by having bought a copy of the standard and implemented what it recommends. It's probably good for PR and company image to get it certified and be able to tell people that you had it verified that you're doing it.
Certification is now being offered by SIBSI, I believe.
It is, and we do have customers for that who are using it for their ESOS compliance. It's a good way of managing your ESOS compliance because once it's up and running, it sort of looks after itself and you don't have to worry about impending deadlines and what do we need to do for the next round. Yeah, you should. As long as you're maintaining your certificate. Hopefully. Yeah, but of course that shouldn't be the main driver. If it's been implemented effectively and operated effectively, it's going to be saving companies a lot of money.
So on the subject of money saving then, Andrew, have you got any examples where organisations can actually provide tangible evidence that through implementing an energy management system that they can actually save money?
Yes, one particular company comes to mind. They were one of our early 50,001 customers, and we're certifying their manufacturing sites across Europe. And of course, 50,001 meets all of the ESOS equivalent requirements in all the member states. So they've gone for a system that they've rolled out across all of their European manufacturing sites, and we certify all of them. Their headline objective was actually to reduce their carbon footprint. So their aim was to be zero carbon by 2020. And the logic they applied was if they used less energy in the first place, the amount of renewable energy they would need to source would be less, which obviously saves a lot of money because at the time they embarked on this, which was 4 years ago, renewable energy sources were expensive. So they've saved themselves a lot of money by reducing their energy demand and therefore reducing the amount of energy they've had to.
Yeah, I think it's great to hear that. And we've also had similar experience here at Blackmores. We were involved with the energy management standard when it was a British standard, BSEN 16001, before it became an ISO standard, ISO 50001. And we found significant financial benefits with an NHS trust. And they won a number of awards as a result of that. And that combined with having carbon management targets and those sorts of things, and introducing different sorts of initiatives like LED lighting and CHP plants, that sort of thing, that they actually saved just under £1 million in energy costs alone. So it can be quite significant. But also we did some research with Hertford University as well, specifically with data centres, and we could see trends there in terms of cost benefits. So I think when people think about ESOS, they think, more red tape, more paperwork, but actually there is an underlying, value to actually going through that process of understanding your energy consumption and then looking at opportunities to reduce that, isn't there?
Yes, I think done effectively, it's a zero cost game, and in fact it should be a money saving exercise. It should be,
as well as the environment. Yes, yeah. Okay, great. Well, just to the final question, for those organisations that haven't actually met the deadline yet, the 5th of December 2019, what do you think the potential implications of that is going to be for those companies?
Well, there are financial penalties for being late reporting, which were used last time to ultimately sort of chase down the outstanding companies. I think because of the rush last time, there was quite good periods of grace allowed, but I don't get the impression that they'll be so generous this time. I think the attitude was, you had to comply last time, so you don't need a period of grace this time. But anecdotally, I think there are companies that are not going to make the 5th of December deadline. Assessors are telling their prospective clients that they'll take on the work, but it will be the company's problem to negotiate with the Environment Agency, and that's what they will need to do: contact them and explain they're going to be late, and take whatever the consequences are of that. I think the Environment Agency earlier in the year were concerned about there being enough ESOS assessors to meet the demand in the time scale, and I don't think that is a problem. We've currently got 250 assessors on our register. There are probably another 400 across the other registers, maybe 500 across the other registers. There are about a dozen registers. So there are enough people out there to do this if they're given enough time to do it. But it's not, for most organisations, it's not a trivial task. And a lot of the time is the time it takes the organisations to get the information that the assessor needs. ESOS lead assessors don't have a magic wand that they can just summon up a standard ESOS report on demand.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks very much for sharing that knowledge and information with us about SIBSI and feedback on ESOS. It's been great that you've joined us today. Where can our listeners find out more information about SIBSI?
SIBSI you'll get from their website, which is CIBSE.org. And on our energy professional registers, that's on our website. Our online registers are all on SIBSI certification. That's one long word, .co.uk.
Okay, that's wonderful. Well, we'll be providing links for this podcast on blackmoresuk.com website. So if you'd like to access that, it's going to be available. So yeah, thanks very much for joining us today, Andrew.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Well, we look forward to joining our listeners on the next ISO show. Thanks for listening.
Looking to achieve certification to an ISO standard, or just need a helping hand with ISO compliance? Contact us